In the entire county of Devonshire, no one lasted more than 3 days at Blackwood Manor. They said Lord Alistair was a monster, a man so bitter, so twisted by his paralysis, that he chewed up caregivers and spat them out for sport. 14 women had fled the estate in tears within a single month. But they didn't know Clara Thorne. They didn't know that a widowed mother with a hungry child has no room for fear, only survival. When she walked through those iron gates, everyone expected her to run. But Clara wasn't just there to change bandages. She was there to uncover a deadly secret that had shattered a family. This is the story of the woman who didn't just survive the Beast of Blackwood. She saved him. The rain in November of 1889 was relentless, turning the cobblestone roads of the village into slick, treacherous paths. But Clara Thorne didn't feel the cold. The numbness in her heart from burying her husband, Thomas, 3 months ago, was far colder than the English winter. Clara tightened her thin wool shawl around her shoulders as she stood before the imposing iron gates of Blackwood Manor. In her pocket, she clutched a crumpled piece of paper, the advertisement that every woman in town had laughed at. Wanted. Live-in caregiver for Lord Alistair Blackwood. High wages. Must have thick skin. Apply to Mrs. Gable. You're making a mistake, Clara. Her neighbour, Mrs. Higgins, had warned her that morning while feeding Clara's 5-year-old daughter, Lily, a bowl of porridge. That man is cursed. He was a war hero once, they say, until the accident. Now, he's the devil in a wheelchair. He threw a hot tureen of soup at the last girl because it was lukewarm. Clara had looked at Lily, whose shoes were worn through to the soles. The devil pays £3 a week, Mrs. Higgins, and Lily needs a winter coat. Now, standing before the manor, Clara took a deep breath. The house was a sprawling Gothic monstrosity of dark stone and ivy that looked like it was choking the life out of the walls. She pushed the gate open and walked the long drive. The door was answered by Mrs. Gable, a severe-looking woman with grey hair, pulled back so tight it pulled at her eyes. She looked Clara up and down, noting the frayed cuffs of her dress and the determination in her jaw. "You're the widow Thorne?" Mrs. Gable asked, her voice clipped. "I am," Clara said, her voice steady. "I'm here for the position." Mrs. Gable sighed, stepping aside to let her in. The foyer was grand but neglected. Dust motes danced in the dim light, and the air smelled of stale lavender and old resentment. "I should warn you, Mrs. Thorne, the last one left this morning. She didn't even pack her trunk, just ran." "I don't run," Clara said simply. "I need this job." "Lord Blackwood is difficult," Mrs. Gable said, leading her up the grand staircase. "Since the carriage accident 2 years ago took the use of his legs, his temper has become legendary. He refuses visitors. He refuses kindness. He mostly sits in the West Wing and broods. Your duties are simple. Bathe him, dress him, ensure he eats, and administer his medicine at strictly noon and midnight. Do not speak unless spoken to. And never, ever look him directly in the eye if he is in a mood." "What kind of medicine?" Clara asked, her practical nature taking over. "A tonic prescribed by his cousin, Dr. Arthur Blackwood. It helps with the spasms," Mrs. Gable said, stopping before a heavy oak door. She lowered her voice. "Arthur is the only family he has left. He manages the estate since Alistair. Well, since Alistair gave up on life." Mrs. Gable put her hand on the doorknob. "1 week, Mrs. Thorne. If you last 1 week, I will give you a bonus. But I won't hold my breath." She opened the door. The room was shrouded in darkness, the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight against the afternoon light. It smelled of brandy and sickness. In the center of the room, Facing the fireplace where a dying fire sputtered, sat a man in a wheelchair. "Get out!" The voice was a low growl, rough like gravel. "I told you, Gable, I don't want another weeping girl in here. Send her away." Mrs. Gable nudged Clara forward and quickly closed the door, leaving Clara alone with the beast. Clara didn't flinch. She walked to the window and, with a swift motion, ripped the curtains open. Grey light flooded the room, revealing the man in the chair. Lord Alistair Blackwood was terrifyingly handsome, despite the unkempt beard and the dark circles under his eyes. He had a strong jaw, dark, unruly hair, and eyes the colour of a stormy sea, eyes that were currently widening in shock and rage. "Who gave you permission to touch those curtains?" he roared, spinning his chair around with surprising strength in his arms. He grabbed a crystal tumbler from the side table and hurled it across the room. It smashed against the wall inches from Clara's head, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Clara didn't scream. She didn't cower. She didn't even blink. She looked at the shattered glass, then looked directly at him. "That was a waste of good crystal, my lord. And you missed." Alistair paused, his mouth slightly open. He was used to terror. He was used to apologies. He wasn't used to a small woman in a faded dress looking at him like he was a naughty schoolboy. "I am Clara Thorne," she said, reaching into her apron pocket and pulling out a pair of gloves. "And I have a 5-year-old daughter who is far better behaved than you. Now, shall we get you cleaned up? You smell like a distillery." Alistair narrowed his eyes. "You won't last an hour." "We'll see," Clara said, crouching down to pick up the glass shards. "Lift your wheels, please. You're rolling on the debris." For the first time in 2 years, Alistair Blackwood didn't have a retort. He watched her, bewildered. The war had begun. The first 3 days were a battle of attrition. Alistair tried everything to break her. On Tuesday morning, he knocked a bowl of scalding oatmeal out of her hands. Clara simply stepped back to avoid the splash, sighed and said, "I suppose you'll be hungry until lunch then," and began to scrub the floor without a word of complaint. He stared at her back, waiting for the tears. They never came. On Wednesday, he insulted her late husband. A soldier, was he? Alistair sneered as she changed the linens on his bed. Probably a coward who got shot in the back. Clara stopped it. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the sheets. The room went deadly silent. She turned slowly, her brown eyes blazing with a fire that made Alistair grip the armrests of his chair. "My husband died pulling 3 men out of a burning mine shaft, my lord," she said, her voice quiet and lethal. "He was half the size of you and twice the man. Do not speak of him again." She finished the bed with sharp, angry tucks. Alistair looked away, a flicker of something looking like shame crossing his face. He didn't speak for the rest of the day. By Thursday, the dynamic began to shift. Clara wasn't just a caregiver, she was an unmovable object. But she was also observant. She noticed things that didn't add up. Every day at noon, Mrs. Gable would bring up a small silver tray with a vial of dark green liquid. "Dr. Arthur's orders," she would say. Whenever Alistair took the medicine, he didn't get better. He got worse. Within an hour of the dosage, his hands would shake violently, his speech would slur, and he would fall into a deep, groggy lethargy that lasted for hours. He would complain of a burning sensation in his legs, not feeling, but a phantom fire. "Why do you take this?" Clara asked him on Friday afternoon. He was slumped in his chair, sweat beading on his forehead. "Arthur says, it stops the nerve death," Alistair mumbled, his eyes unfocused. "Says I'll wither away without it." "It looks like poison," Clara muttered to herself, wiping his brow with a cool cloth. What? Alistair asked sharply, though his voice was weak. Nothing, Clara lied. But her mind was racing. She had nursed her husband through sickness before the mine accident. She knew the smell of opium, and she knew the smell of arsenic. This tonic smelled like bitter almonds and rot. That evening, a visitor arrived. Clara was polishing the banister on the landing when the front doors swung open. A man strode in like he owned the place. He was tall, dressed in an immaculate grey suit, with slicked-back blonde hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, Mrs. Gable," the man boomed. "How is my dear cousin rotting away today?" It was Arthur Blackwood, the heir apparent. "He is resting, Dr. Blackwood," Mrs. Gable said, taking his coat. "The new girl seems to be managing him well." Arthur paused, pulling off his leather gloves slowly. "New girl? I thought he scared the last one off." "This one is sturdy," Mrs. Gable said. Arthur looked up the stairs and locked eyes with Clara. A cold shiver ran down her spine. His eyes were predatory, calculating. "Is she now?" Arthur smiled, revealing teeth that were too white. "Bring her down. I wish to instruct her on the proper care of the patient." Clara walked down the stairs, keeping her face neutral. "You must be Clara," Arthur said, stepping too close, invading her personal space. "I am Dr. Blackwood. I manage Alistair's condition." "Mr. Blackwood mentioned you," Clara said politely. "Did he?" Arthur laughed lightly. "Complaining, I'm sure. Listen to me closely, Clara. Alistair is fragile. His mind is deteriorating along with his legs. He may say strange things. Paranoia is a symptom of his disease. You are to ignore anything he says about the estate, money, or me. Just give him the medicine and keep him quiet. Do we understand each other?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a gold sovereign, a week's wages in a single coin. He pressed it into her hand. "For your extra trouble." Clara looked at the coin, then at Arthur. It felt like a bribe. It felt like hush money. "I understand my duties, sir," Clara said, dropping the coin into her pocket. She needed the money for Lily, but she wouldn't sell her soul for it. "Good." Arthur patted her shoulder, his hand lingering a moment too long. "Keep him sedated. It's for his own good." Clara went back upstairs, her heart pounding. She waited until she heard Arthur leave the house, an hour later. She went into Alistair's room. He was awake, staring at the fire, looking more lucid than he had all afternoon. The effects of the noon dose were wearing off. "He was here, wasn't he?" Alistair asked, without turning around. "Yes," Clara said. "Did he give you money?" Clara paused. "Yes." Alistair let out a bitter laugh. "He's paying you to be my jailer, Clara. He wants me dead, but he needs it to look natural. He needs me to die of complications, so he gets the title and the fortune." Clara walked over to him. She knelt beside his chair, forcing him to look at her. "My lord," she whispered, "can you move your toes, even a little?" "No," he spat. "I'm a cripple. Don't mock me." "I'm not mocking you, but I watched you this morning. When the coal scuttle fell, your leg jerked. Not a spasm, a reflex." Alistair stared at her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Clara said, her voice trembling with the weight of the accusation, "that I don't think you're paralyzed. I think you're being drugged into paralysis." Alistair's face went pale. "That's impossible. Arthur is family." "Family is who you trust," Clara said firmly. "Not necessarily who you share blood with. Tomorrow we are going to try an experiment. But you have to trust me, and it's going to hurt." "What experiment?" "We're skipping the noon dose," Clara said. "If I skip it, the pain—" "I will be right here," Clara promised. I won't leave your side, but we need to know the truth." Alistair looked at this woman, this widow in a ragged dress who had walked into his personal hell and started rearranging the furniture. For the first time in 2 years, he felt a flicker of something dangerous. "Hope. Do it," he whispered. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed noon. The sound reverberated through the silent room like a funeral toll. Clara stood by the window, the silver tray in her hand. On it sat the vial of emerald green liquid. Mrs. Gable had delivered it 5 minutes ago, her eyes scanning the room suspiciously before leaving. Alistair sat in his chair, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. He was already sweating, his body craving the sedation it had grown accustomed to over the last 2 years. "Give it to me," he grated out, his resolve wavering. Just half the dose, Clara. The pain is starting." Clara looked at the vial. She uncorked it and sniffed it. The smell of bitter almonds and rot was pungent. She walked over to the large potted fern in the corner of the room, a plant that had been struggling to survive in the gloom. "Watch," she said. She poured the entire contents of the vial into the soil. "No!" Alistair shouted, half rising in his chair before collapsing back, his legs useless dead weights. "You foolish woman! Do you know what you've done?" "I've saved you," Clara said calmly, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. She hid the empty vial in her apron pocket. "Now, we wait." The next 6 hours were a descent into hell. By 3:00 p.m., Alistair was shivering violently, despite the roaring fire Clara had built. He was hallucinating, shouting names of men who had died in the war, screaming about horses and blood. He thrashed in the chair, nearly tipping it over. Clara didn't leave him. She dragged a heavy ottoman over and sat directly in front of him, using her own body to keep him in the chair. She bathed his forehead with cold water, whispering soothing words that he couldn't hear. "You are a witch," he hissed at one point, his eyes wild and unseeing. "Arthur warned me. You're trying to kill me." "I am bringing you back," she whispered, holding his thrashing hands. "Hold on, Alistair. Hold on." By 6:00 p.m., the rage turned to tears. The great Lord Blackwood, the iron-willed soldier, wept openly. He spoke of the loneliness, the shame of being half a man, the desire to just end it all. Clara held him against her chest, stroking his matted hair, letting his tears soak her bodice. It was the most intimate moment of her life. Then, at 8:00 p.m., the screaming stopped. The room went quiet. Alistair was slumped forward, exhausted, breathing raggedly. Clara checked the potted fern in the corner. It was dead. The leaves had turned black and curled in on themselves within hours. The poison was potent. "Clara," Alistair croaked. His voice was raw. "I'm here," she said, kneeling beside him. "My legs." Clara's heart stopped. "What about them? Is it the burning?" "No," he whispered, his eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of fear and wonder. "It's a cramp, a muscle cramp in my right calf." Tears sprang to Clara's eyes. A paralyzed man does not feel muscle cramps. "That means the nerves are waking up," she said, her voice trembling. "Try to push against my hand." She placed her hand against the sole of his leather boot. Alistair squeezed his eyes shut. His face turned red with exertion. He groaned, the veins in his neck standing out. Nothing happened. "I can't," he sobbed. "I can't do it." "Yes, you can," Clara commanded, her voice fierce. "Arthur thinks you are dead. He thinks you are a corpse in a chair. Are you going to let him win? Push, Alistair. Push for your life." A low growl started in his throat. He channeled every ounce of hatred, every ounce of pain into his right leg. And then Clara felt it. A twitch, a faint, undeniable pressure against her palm. "You did it," she gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. "You moved." Alistair slumped back, gasping for air, a hysterical laugh bubbling up from his chest. I moved. He looked at Clara, really looked at her, seeing her not as a servant, but as the angel who had descended into his pit to pull him out. "We cannot tell a soul," Alistair said, his mind sharpening as the fog of the drugs lifted completely. "If Arthur knows I can move, he won't use poison next time. He'll use a pillow or a knife." "We have to pretend," Clara agreed. "I will water down the tonic. Mrs. Gable prepares it, but I can swap it before you drink it. You have to act the part of the invalid." Alistair reached out and took Clara's hand. His grip was strong, warm, and alive. "You are risking your life for me, Clara Thorne." "Why?" Clara looked down at their joined hands. "Because I know what it is to be helpless, my lord, and I know a good man when I see one, even if he tries very hard to hide it." 2 weeks passed. The deception was working. Alistair was getting stronger. Every night, after the household was asleep, Clara would help him out of the chair. He would drag himself across the floor, sweating and grunting, forcing his atrophied muscles to remember their function. By the second week, he could stand for 10 seconds while holding the mantelpiece. But the atmosphere in the house was shifting. Arthur was visiting more often, his eyes tracking Clara with a mixture of lust and suspicion. He sensed a change in Alistair, a clarity in his eyes that shouldn't have been there. But Clara played the part of the exhausted, obedient nurse perfectly. However, a new problem arose on a rainy Tuesday. Mrs. Higgins, Clara's neighbour, had fallen ill with the gripper. There was no one to watch Lily. Clara had no choice. She bundled her 5-year-old daughter in a coat that was too big for her and marched her through the servants' entrance of Blackwood Manor. "Now, Lily," Clara whispered as she hid the child in the small pantry adjacent to the kitchen. "You must stay here, quiet as a mouse. Here is some bread and your doll. Mamma will come back every hour to check on you. Do not go upstairs. The beast lives upstairs." "The beast?" Lily asked, her eyes wide. "A grumpy man who doesn't like noise," Clara corrected. But 5-year-olds are not known for their obedience when boredom sets in. Around 2:00 p.m., while Clara was in the laundry room scrubbing Alistair's linens, Lily grew tired of the pantry. She wanted to see the castle. She wandered out, her small boots making soft thuds on the floor. She found the grand staircase. It looked like a mountain to climb. Clutching her ragged doll, Miss Betsy, she ascended. Upstairs, Alistair was sitting in his room, reading a book. He was practicing moving his toes inside his boots. Left, right, curl, release. The door creaked open. Alistair looked up, expecting Clara or Mrs. Gable. Instead, he saw a tiny figure with messy blonde curls and a smudge of dirt on her nose. She was staring at him with unabashed curiosity. Alistair froze. He wasn't wearing his drugged invalid mask. He looked alert. "Who are you?" he barked, his old instinct to intimidate kicking in. "How did you get in here?" The girl didn't run. She walked right up to his wheelchair. She looked at his legs, then at his face. "Are you the beast?" she asked. Alistair blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Mamma says the beast lives upstairs, but you look like a prince, a sad one." Alistair felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't been called a prince, or even a man, in years. "I am Lord Blackwood, and you are trespassing, little girl." "I'm Lily," she announced. "I'm bored. Do you want to play?" "I cannot play," Alistair said stiffly. "I cannot walk." Lily frowned. She looked at his legs. Then she held out her doll. "Miss Betsy has a broken leg, too. Look, the stuffing is coming out. She still plays tea party, though." She placed the dirty, ragged doll on Alistair's knee. Alistair looked at the doll. It was pathetic. It was loved. Something inside the icy fortress of his heart cracked. He reached out and touched the doll's yarn hair. "Miss Betsy looks like she's seen battle," Alistair murmured. "She fell out of the cart," Lily said solemnly. "Mama fixed her. Mama fixes everything." "Yes," Alistair said softly. "She does." Just then, the door flew open. Clara stood there, breathless, her face pale with terror. She saw her daughter standing next to the volatile Count. She saw the doll on his knee. "Lily!" Clara gasped, rushing forward to grab the child. "My lord, I am so sorry. My sitter fell ill. I had no choice. Please don't fire me. I'll take her away immediately." She pulled Lily back, shielding her body with her own, expecting the crystal tumbler to fly, expecting the shouting. "Clara," Alistair said. His voice was calm. Clara flinched, waiting for the blow. "She's fine," Alistair said. He picked up the doll from his knee and held it out. "She forgot Miss Betsy." Clara stared at him. The man who threw soup at nurses was holding a doll with infinite gentleness. "Let her stay," Alistair said, looking at Lily. "The room is too quiet. She can sit by the fire and draw. I won't mind." Clara's shoulders sagged in relief. She looked from the man to her daughter. "Thank you, my lord." "And Clara?" "Yes?" "She has your eyes." For the next week, the gloom of the West Wing was broken by the sound of a child's laughter. Lily became a co-conspirator. Alistair would read her stories of knights and dragons, his voice animating the characters in a way that made Lily squeal with delight. It was a domestic paradise built on a precipice. One afternoon, while Lily was napping on the rug and Clara was mending a shirt by the window, Alistair spoke. "I need to stand, Clara. Now." "You're tired, Alistair. You did your exercises this morning." "I need to know I can protect her," he said, looking at the sleeping child. "If Arthur finds out about her, he will use her. I know him. He'll threaten you to get to me. I need to be able to stand up to him, literally." Clara put down her sewing. She walked over and offered her hands. "Up then, soldier." Alistair gripped her hands. He grit his teeth. He pushed. He rose. He stood there, swaying, sweat pouring down his face. He let go of Clara's left hand, then her right. He was standing on his own. "I'm going to kill him," Alistair vowed, his voice dark and steady, "for what he did to me, and for what he plans to do." Just then, the heavy oak door creaked. They hadn't heard the footsteps in the hall. Alistair collapsed back into the chair instantly, his body going limp, his eyes glazing over. Clara spun around, grabbing a dust cloth, pretending to clean the mantel. It was Arthur. But he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by a man carrying a black leather bag. "Good afternoon," Arthur said, his eyes scanning the room. He lingered on the sleeping child, a frown creasing his forehead. "Who is the brat?" "My daughter, sir," Clara said, keeping her head down. "A temporary arrangement." "Unprofessional," Arthur sneered. "But no matter. This is Dr. Silas Vane, a specialist from London. I've decided Alistair's condition is worsening. Dr. Vane is here to recommend institutionalization." Clara's blood ran cold. Institutionalization meant an asylum. It meant Alistair would disappear and Arthur would inherit everything immediately. "He doesn't need an asylum," Clara said, her voice shaking. "He is comfortable here." "He is a vegetable," Arthur said, coldly. He walked over to Alistair, who was drooling slightly, playing the part perfectly. Arthur slapped Alistair's cheek, hard. Alistair didn't flinch. "See," Arthur smiled. "Lights are on. Nobody's home. Dr. Vane, prepare the papers. We move him tomorrow." Arthur turned to leave, but stopped at the door. He looked at Clara, then at Lily. "And Mrs. Thorne? Pack your things. Once he's gone, your services and your charity nursery are no longer required." The door slammed shut. Clara looked at Alistair. He opened his eyes. They weren't glazed anymore. They were burning with a cold, terrifying fury. "Tomorrow," Alistair whispered. "Tomorrow is the day I die, or the day I take back my life." The slam of the door echoed like a gunshot. Lily woke with a start on the rug, rubbing her eyes. "Mama, is the beast angry again?" Before Clara could answer, Alistair leaned forward in his chair. The feral look in his eyes softened instantly as he looked at the child. "No, little one," Alistair said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "The beast isn't angry. He is determined. Go with your mother now." Clara hurried Lily out of the room, entrusting her to a bewildered scullery maid in the kitchen with instructions to keep her hidden and fed. Then she raced back up the stairs, her heart pounding a rhythm of sheer terror against her ribs. She burst back into the room to find Alistair trying to stand by the fireplace, his knuckles white on the mantelpiece, his whole body shaking with the effort. "What are you doing?" she hissed, locking the door behind her. "If Gable walks in—" "If I am to leave this house tomorrow in a straitjacket," Alistair snarled, sweat dripping from his nose, "I intend to walk out on my own 2 feet and spit in Arthur's face before they take me." He collapsed back into the chair with a groan of frustration. "It's no use, Clara. I'm too weak. One man against Arthur, that crooked doctor, and their hired muscle. I can't protect you. I can't even protect myself." Clara knelt before him, taking his trembling hands in hers. Outside, the winter storm finally broke. Thunder cracked overhead, rattling the tall window panes, and rain began to lash against the glass in torrents. "We are not giving up," Clara said fiercely. "Listen to me, Alistair. They cannot take you to an asylum without proof of insanity or incompetence. Arthur has purchased the proof in the form of Dr. Vane. Then we need counterproof. We need the poison." Alistair's eyes widened. "Gable keeps the supply locked in the butler's pantry downstairs. Arthur brings a new batch every Monday. She only mixes the daily dose." "I have to get it," Clara said, standing up. "If I can steal a full vial, we can take it to the magistrate in the village. We can prove you are being dosed with laudanum and cyanide." "No," Alistair grabbed her wrist. His grip was painfully tight. "It's too dangerous. Arthur is staying in the East Wing tonight to oversee the transfer. If he catches you prowling around—" "Do you have a better idea, my lord?" Clara challenged him. "Because from where I stand, our options are prison for you and starvation for my daughter and me." Alistair looked up at her. In the flash of lightning that illuminated the room, she looked like an avenging angel in a maid's uniform. "Clara," he whispered. He pulled her closer until her knees bumped against his chair. The air between them crackled, thicker than the storm outside. "Why? Why are you doing this? You could take Lily and run tonight. Save yourselves." "I told you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know a good man when I see one." "I am not a good man," he bitterly replied. "I was a drunkard before the accident, a tyrant after it. I treated you like a dog when you arrived." "You were in pain," Clara said softly, reaching out to touch his cheek, bristly with the day's beard growth. "And you were alone in the dark. Anyone would become a beast in the dark." Alistair leaned into her touch, closing his eyes. For 2 years, the only human touch he had known was clinical, rough, or abusive. This touch was fire. It was life. "You brought the light back, Clara Thorne," he murmured. He opened his eyes, the stormy grey depths swirling with raw emotion. He pulled her down and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, tentative kiss. It was desperation and hunger, a collision of two lonely souls on the edge of oblivion. Clara melted into him, wrapping her arms around his neck, forgetting her station, forgetting the danger, forgetting everything but the man who had embraced her daughter's ragged doll. When they pulled apart, breathless, the reality of the situation crashed back down on them. "Go," Alistair said, his voice rough. "Get the poison. And for God's sake, be careful. If anything happened to you." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Clara left the room, her lips still burning from his kiss. The house was pitch black, save for the occasional flash of lightning. She crept down the servant stairs, the wood creaking under her feet, like old bones complaining. The butler's pantry was near the kitchen. She knew where Mrs. Gable kept her keys, hanging on a hook behind the cellar door. Clara retrieved them, her hands shaking so badly she barely made a sound. She found the small cupboard in the pantry. The key turned with a loud clack. Inside sat 3 vials of the emerald green liquid. The death sentence. Clara grabbed one and shoved it into her bodice, against her sweating skin. She locked the cabinet and turned to leave. A floorboard creaked behind her. Clara froze. "A bit late for a snack, isn't it, Mrs. Thorne?" Arthur Blackwood stood in the doorway of the kitchen, holding a candelabra. The flickering light cast long, demonic shadows across his handsome face. He was smiling, but his eyes were ice cold. I needed milk for Lily," Clara lied, backing away until her spine hit the cold stone wall. Arthur took a step forward. He smelled of expensive brandy and cheap perfume. "You're a terrible liar, Clara. I've been watching you. You and the cripple. You think you're clever, nursing him, giving him hope. It's pathetic." He reached out and grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "You know, it's a shame. You're a handsome woman when you're not scowling. Perhaps after Alistair is put away, we could come to an arrangement. I could keep you on. The little brat, too, if she stays quiet." Clara felt sick. The implication was clear. Disgusting. She spat in his face. Arthur recoiled, wiping the saliva from his cheek with a look of pure fury. He raised his hand and backhanded her across the face. Clara fell to the floor, tasting blood in her mouth. "You'll regret that," Arthur hissed. "Tomorrow you'll be begging on the street. Get out of my sight." He kicked her in the ribs, hard, then turned and stalked away. Clara lay on the cold stone floor, clutching her side, tears of pain stinging her eyes. She felt for the vial in her bodice. It was unbroken. She forced herself up. She had the proof. Now they just had to survive the night. The morning dawned grey and miserable, the rain continuing its relentless assault on Blackwood Manor. The mood inside was worse. At 9 a.m. sharp, a black carriage with barred windows pulled up to the front entrance. Arthur greeted Dr. Vane and 2 burly attendants, men holding leather straps that looked uncomfortably like restraints, in the foyer. "Mrs. Gable," Arthur barked at the housekeeper, who stood by the stairs, wringing her hands in her apron. "Is the patient ready for transport?" He is sleeping, sir," Mrs. Gable said quietly. She looked pale, her eyes darting toward the kitchen where Lily was hidden. "Excellent. Less fuss," Arthur said. "Dr. Vane, shall we collect the luggage?" Upstairs, the atmosphere was taut as a bowstring. Alistair was sitting in his chair by the dead fire. He was dressed in a fine wool suit that Clara had brushed, his hair neatly combed, his beard trimmed. He did not look like a madman. He looked like a lord waiting for an execution. Clara stood behind him, her hand resting on his shoulder. Her cheek was swollen and bruised where Arthur had struck her, a stark purple mark against her pale skin. When Alistair had seen it that morning, he had gone unnervingly quiet. The door burst open without a knock. Arthur strode in, followed by the doctor and the orderlies. "Well, cousin," Arthur boomed, feigning joviality. "Time for your holiday. Dr. Vane has found a wonderful facility by the sea. Very restful." Alistair stared straight ahead, his face a mask of vacant apathy. He was playing the role of his life. "He looks catatonic," Dr. Vane noted, scribbling on a clipboard. "Advanced deterioration. Gentlemen, grab him. Careful, he might convulse." The two large orderlies stepped forward, unspooling the leather straps. "Stop!" Clara stepped in front of the wheelchair, her arms spread wide. Arthur laughed. "Oh, look, the devoted nursemaid. Get out of the way, Clara, or I'll have you arrested for obstruction." "You are not taking him anywhere," Clara declared, her voice ringing with authority she didn't know she possessed. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the vial of green liquid. "This is what you've been giving him," she accused, holding it up. "It's poison. Arsenic and laudanum, meant to paralyze him and drive him mad so you can steal his title." The room went deathly silent. Dr. Vane looked nervously at Arthur. Arthur's face darkened. "She's hysterical," he scoffed. "Grief over her dead husband has unhinged her mind. That's just his nerve tonic. Seize her!" One of the orderlies grabbed Clara roughly by the arm, yanking her away from the chair. She cried out as he twisted her arm. "No!" Alistair shouted. It wasn't a weak, drugged croak. It was a command. Arthur sneered. "Shut him up! Strap him down!" The second orderly reached for Alistair, and then the miracle happened. Alistair's hands, supposedly weak and useless, shot out with lightning speed. He grabbed the orderly by the lapels of his coat and yanked him down, smashing the man's face into the armrest of the wooden wheelchair. The man crumpled to the floor with a broken nose. Arthur's jaw dropped. Dr. Vane gasped, dropping his clipboard. Slowly, deliberately, Alistair Blackwood placed his hands on the arms of his chair. He groaned, the veins in his neck protruding, as he pushed down. He rose. He stood to his full height, 6 feet and 2 inches of aristocratic rage. He swayed slightly, his legs trembling after 2 years of disuse, but he stood. "My God," Mrs. Gable whispered from the doorway, crossing herself. Arthur looked like he had seen a ghost. "Impossible. You're a cripple." "I saw the medical reports." "You saw what you wanted to see, Arthur," Alistair said, his voice low and dangerous. He took a step forward. Then another. He was walking towards his cousin. "You poisoned me for 2 years. You stole from my estate. You struck this woman." Alistair pointed a shaking finger at Clara's bruised face. "For that alone, I should kill you." Arthur, realizing his scheme, had utterly collapsed, panicked. His eyes darted around the room, landing on the open doorway where a small blonde head was peeking around the frame. Lily had heard the shouting and climbed the stairs. "Lily, run!" Clara screamed, struggling against the orderly holding her. Arthur lunged. He was faster than the recovering Alistair. He grabbed Lily by her small arm, hauling her into the room. He pulled a small, silver-plated Derringer pistol from inside his coat and pressed it against the child's temple. Lily screamed, terrified. "Back off!" Arthur yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "Back off, Alistair, or I swear I'll paint the walls with her." The room froze. Alistair stopped dead, his heart hammering against his ribs. Clara stopped struggling, staring in horror at her daughter held at gunpoint. "Arthur, let her go," Alistair said, holding his hands up slowly. "This is between us. She's a child." "You ruined everything," Arthur screamed, sweat pouring down his face. "I was supposed to be the Earl. It was mine." "It's over, Arthur," Alistair said, trying to keep his voice calm, trying not to look at Lily's tear-streaked face. "Dr. Vane will testify against you to save his own skin. The poison is proof. There is nowhere to go." "I can still take you with me," Arthur snarled, shifting his aim from Lily towards Alistair's chest. A massive crash echoed through the room. Arthur lurched forward, his eyes rolling back in his head. He collapsed to the floor, unconscious, releasing Lily. Behind him stood Mrs. Gable, holding a heavy, cast-iron bed, warmer that she had swung with all her might, into the back of Arthur's skull. The housekeeper looked down at the unconscious villain, breathing heavily. She looked at Alistair, then at Clara, shame burning in her eyes. "He threatened the little girl," Mrs. Gable said thickly. I couldn't abide that. No amount of money is worth that." Clara wrenched herself free from the stunned orderly and rushed to Lily, scooping her up and burying her face in the child's neck, sobbing with relief. Alistair leaned against the wall, his legs finally giving out. He slid down to the floor, exhausted, painfully sore, but alive. He looked across the room at Clara holding her daughter. Their eyes met. The storm outside had finally stopped. The silence that descended on Blackwood Manor after the police dragged Arthur and Dr. Vane away was not empty. It was heavy with the weight of a storm finally passing. The local magistrate, Sir Thomas Shelby, had listened to the testimony of Clara, the weeping confession of Mrs. Gable, and the damning evidence of the poisoned soil in the potted fern. Arthur Blackwood, screaming threats and profanities until the very end, was thrown into the carriage in irons, facing charges of attempted murder and fraud. His life of luxury was over. The cold stone walls of Dartmoor prison awaited him. But the real story wasn't about the villain's fall. It was about the hero's rise. That night, Alistair refused to return to the West Wing. "I am done hiding in the dark," he declared. Instead, he had a bed made up in the master suite, the room he hadn't entered since before his accident. Recovery was not instant. The miracle of the adrenaline that allowed him to stand against Arthur faded into the brutal reality of physical rehabilitation. For the next 3 months, the manor became a gymnasium of pain and progress. But this time, the pain wasn't solitary. Clara was there for every step. She was the hand that steadied him when his knees buckled. She was the voice that scolded him when he tried to do too much, too fast. And Lily was the laughter that reminded him why he was fighting. The little girl would march ahead of him down the long hallway, holding her doll, shouting, left, right, keep up, Lord Alistair." By the time the first buds of spring appeared in April 1890, the wheelchair was gone. Alistair walked with an ebony cane, a slight limp the only reminder of his 2-year imprisonment. However, as Alistair grew stronger, Clara grew quieter. One crisp morning, Alistair found Clara in the library. She wasn't reading. She was standing by the window, watching Lily chase a butterfly in the garden. A packed trunk sat by the door. Alistair felt a cold grip of fear in his chest, a fear far worse than anything Arthur had ever instilled in him. "What is this?" Alistair asked, pointing at the trunk with his cane. Clara turned, her eyes red-rimmed. She smoothed her apron, reverting to the formal demeanor of the employee she had arrived as. "You are well, my lord," she said softly. "You can walk, you can ride. You are reclaiming your seat on the council. You no longer need a nurse." "I see," Alistair said, his voice tight. "So you simply leave? Job done, wages paid, goodbye. I am a widow, my lord, and you are an earl. People are already talking. I cannot stay here without ruining your reputation." Clara's voice broke. "I have found a position in London, a governess job. We leave in the hour." She picked up her bonnet, her hands trembling. She moved to walk past him, unable to look him in the eye because she knew if she did, she would never be able to leave. As she passed him, Alistair dropped his cane. It clattered loudly on the floor. He reached out and grabbed her hand, pulling her to a stop. Reputation? Alistair laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Do you think I care about the whispers of society? I spent 2 years in hell, Clara. The only thing that made it bearable was you. Alistair, please, she whispered, tears spilling over. Don't make this harder. I am a servant. You are the master of Blackwood. No, he said firmly. He turned her around, forcing her to look at him. He took her face in his hands, wiping away the tears with his thumbs. You are not a servant. You are the woman who looked the devil in the eye and didn't blink. You are the woman who saved my life when I had given up on it. You are the mother of the child who taught me how to smile again. He slowly lowered himself onto one knee. It was stiff, and it hurt, but he did it with the grace of the soldier he once was. I didn't learn to walk again, so I could watch you walk away from me, Clara Thorne, Alistair said, his voice thick with emotion. I cannot manage this estate alone. I cannot manage my life alone. Be my wife. Be the Countess of Blackwood. Clara stared at him, stunned. People will say you married the help. Let them talk, Alistair smiled, a genuine, dazzling smile that lit up the gloom of the library. They will say I married the only woman brave enough to handle me. What say you, Clara? Will you take on the beast for a lifetime? Clara looked at the man kneeling before her, no longer broken, but healed by her love. She looked out the window at her daughter, playing safely in a garden that was finally blooming. The beast is gone, Clara whispered, dropping to her knees to embrace him. I only see a king. Epilogue. 3 years later. The Christmas ball of 1893 at Blackwood Manor was the event of the season. The house, once a place of shadows and sickness, was ablaze with candlelight and laughter. Lord Alistair Blackwood stood at the top of the grand staircase, looking down at the guests. He stood tall, the cane now merely a fashion accessory rather than a necessity. Beside him stood his wife, Lady Clara Blackwood. She wore a gown of deep crimson silk, diamonds sparkling at her throat, a far cry from the faded grey dress she had worn on that rainy day 4 years ago. But the true star of the evening was 8-year-old Lily, who was currently charming the local bishop with a story about how her papa had slain a dragon, which sounded suspiciously like the story of how he punched the orderly. Alistair leaned over and whispered to his wife, Mrs. Gable is crying again. Clara looked over at the housekeeper, who was serving punch with a watery smile. Mrs. Gable had been forgiven, though she spent every day trying to make up for her past cowardice. She's happy, Alistair, Clara smiled, resting her hand on her stomach, where a new heir to the Blackwood fortune was quietly growing, just 3 months along. I'm happy, Alistair said, kissing her temple. I never thought I would be, but I am. That, Clara said, taking his arm as the music started, is because you finally let someone open the curtains. They walked down the stairs together, step by step, into a future that was bright, warm, and entirely their own. The paralyzed Count was gone. In his place was a man who had learned that even the most broken things can be mended with enough courage and enough love. And that, my friends, is the incredible story of Clara and Alistair. It's a reminder that sometimes the strongest medicine isn't found in a bottle, but in the heart of someone who refuses to give up on you. Clara walked into a nightmare and turned it into a fairy tale, not with magic, but with grit and love. I want to know what you think. Could you have forgiven Mrs. Gable for her role in Arthur's scheme? Or was her redemption too easy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have a brand new drama coming next week about a homeless boy who finds a winning lottery ticket, and you won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and remember, even in the darkest winter, spring is just around the corner. See you next time.